Yeah, of where you started and where you are now. It's the most inspirational thing. Uh, Can you please share that? I think everyone would absolutely love your story.
Well, the simple is that it started in New York City. My mother was white. She was a prostitute. My father was black. And what we can tell from my story that we know, and what's beautiful is that during COVID, COVID put me on the sideline for the first time. My world tour was canceled. And it was the first time I had a chance to really check in with myself in a long time. And I'm embarrassed to say that, especially being a, professional development, self-help type of guy that we all are. It gave me a chance to check in on myself. And I had my shirt off, my barefoot shoes, walking around Daniel Island, South Carolina every day. And two things occurred to me as I walked around this specific track every day. Number one, it was clear to me that I had some maturation. I needed to mature in some areas. And number one specifically was that I really checked in with myself, and I realized, Jane, I didn't love myself in a healthy manner. And as I unpacked that, I realized there was just a lot of parts of my story that I didn't know. And of course, I lost my parents in New York City when I was born, was raised by another family who fostered me. You go through foster care. There's always issues with that. I lost that group of family in West Virginia when I was a teen. And it took me stopping and being 40 years old to really check in with myself and say, do I really love myself in a healthy way? And the quick answer was no. And the reason why was, we learn so much now about attachment theory and psychology. And as one of the great pastors / counselors who I know who mentors me, his name's Chip Judd. He said, Morris, when you're a kid, you learn how to get your needs met from the time you're a baby. And he said, whatever skills you develop early on to get your needs met, you take those skills into adulthood, into corporate America, into entrepreneurship. You take those skills into your marriage. And if you're not aware of what those skills are, good or bad, you'll be on spouse number 3 or 4 before you ever get a chance to blink. And it made sense for me. My mother was a prostitute in New York City. She's white, father was black. And the stories that I'm finding out about my parents now through DNA, by the way, Jane, I did both DNA tests. I did 23andMe and I did Ancestry.com because I really wanted to find out as much about my parents as I could. Mm-hmm. And the crazy thing about it is I was able to get into contact with some of their best friends and brothers who live with them in New York City. And the picture, it wasn't pretty. Mm-hmm. And the story is that my mother started working for another mafia-owned nightclub. And the mob threatened to kill my father. And they had him tied up at their office, and they called who I now call Uncle Roy, his brother. And they said, Roy, you've got 10 minutes to get here. And if you don't get here, we're going to kill your brother, and then we're going to kill you.
Great day.
And here's what we know. He showed up 9 minutes later, and he had a minute to spare. And when he walked in, they told my Uncle Roy, they said, Uncle Roy, and they called him that. They said, we're not going to kill your brother today because we know that you are a Christian man and we respect you because you don't cause problems. But if your brother Maurice comes here looking for Darlene, which was my mother, to my dad, my mother was his property because she was his prostitute. And I was born out of that. Kelly Swanson told me something a couple of years that really put chills down my neck. I was telling her the story of how I had proof and evidence that my mother had multiple abortions before me because they were documented. And I got some of her personal belongings. She had many abortions before me. And I have no idea why on that day, December 4th, 1978, as she drove to St. Vincent's Hospital Center in the middle of New York City, I have no idea why she decided to give birth to me after multiple abortions. But here's what I know. Number one, she gave me life when she didn't have to. Number two, she named me Morris Benjamin Morrison. Morris Morrison, in an industry made famous by guys named Zig Ziglar and the such and such, the name kind of helps a little bit. But number three, when my mom and dad got in trouble with the mob, after they let my father go that day, they were so afraid that something would happen to me that my mother knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a woman in West Virginia who took care of kids. And I ended up just months old in the hands of a black woman in Fairmont, West Virginia, who basically did what strong black women do. She said, give me that baby. And my mother promised to come back and get me when things calmed down. The only problem was, short while after that, at the age of 23, they found my mother's dead body in a hotel room in New York City.
Great day.
My father died of AIDS shortly after that. And everyone who knew about my existence were gone. And so this lady in West Virginia, she adopted me. She raised me. We had a strong family. I was raised in a strong Black African-American family where we love Jesus. We try to respect everybody. And I was raised in West Virginia where everyone were coal miners. So we were taught about hard work. Unfortunately, I lost my second set of parents on my birthday, December 4th, as a teen, when my father, who was an uncle / dad to me, he was falsely accused of shooting another man in the hand and a gunshot wound to the hand, a crime he did not commit, by the way, Jane. He was given 96 years in prison. And when they took him,
gosh,
it crushed his mother. And his mother was Gwendolyn, my grandma who raised me. And I had to bury her 3 weeks later. And I came home to an empty house. And later on in the story, I'll tell you about how my life changed at the hospital that night when I said goodbye to her and what a doctor said to me about America and about this country that we live in and about not being a victim and taking ownership of my life and being able to take the pen and authorize my life in any way that I wanted to, because I was in the safest country in the world. And I was in a place where as long as you didn't become a victim and you were willing to take ownership of your life and work hard and never expect somebody to give you anything, that night saying goodbye to her. Yes, when I walked out the door, I knew I was orphaned twice, but that night and that interaction with the doctor, it changed my life. And the rest of the story is me now standing here with you and great people like you. I've been able to live my life.